In May of 2021, the fake milk company Oatly went public on the Nasdaq, raising over $1 billion at a valuation of $10 billion. From the beginning, Oatly marketed itself as an environmentally sustainable company, both to its customers and investors. Supposedly, their oat-based fake milk produces far fewer greenhouse gas emissions than dairy cows, which notoriously produce large amounts of methane. Their marketing campaigns went viral, leading to surging demand for their oat milk all over the world. Furthermore, 68% of the world's population is lactose intolerant. Oat milk provides a lactose-free way to enjoy a milk-like beverage. Demand was so strong that their production facilities couldn't keep up. They promised to use their $1 billion of IPO proceeds to build massive new factories around the world to turbocharge revenue growth. To capitalize on their success, they also rolled out a wide range of fake dairy products, including oat-based ice cream and yogurt. The company seemed perfectly positioned to cater towards the increasing environmental concerns of millennial and Gen Z consumers. 3 years later, things have not gone to plan. While their revenue was growing at over 50% when they went public, growth has slowed to almost zero today, and they continue to suffer massive operating losses. To date, their share price has declined by 95%, putting them barely above penny stock status. Join us as we delve into the rise and fall of Oatly, which is a story of greenwashing, operational missteps, and the limits of viral marketing. This video is sponsored by Delete Me. Have you ever been freaked out by ads that feel a little too personalized or an incessant amount of obvious scam emails and text messages? These days, it's extremely easy for scammers to create fake emails pretending to be an online payment platform or subscription service, trying to steal your passwords. Just one successful phishing attempt can be financially catastrophic. The reality is, if you use social media, browse the web, or shop online, your personal information is almost certainly being tracked and sold. Websites sell your personal data to data brokers, who profit by selling your personal data to pretty much anyone who's willing to pay. You have the right to contact each one of the hundreds of data brokers and ask them to delete your data, but this is a long and difficult process. That's why I use Delete Me. They do all the work for you. Just input your information and they'll automatically contact hundreds of known data brokers and compel them to remove your data. Within 7 days, they'll give you a report showing all the personal data they've removed for you. Take a look at all the data brokers that had my personal data, and Delete Me has already removed them. I've already seen a massive decrease in spam emails as a result. And now you can get 20% off Delete Me US consumer plans when you go to joindeleteme.com/WSM or use the link in the description below and use the promo code WSM at checkout. Thank you to Delete Me for sponsoring this video. And now back to Oatly. Oat milk was invented by Richard Oatstay in the 1990s. He was a professor at Lund University in Sweden. By this point, soy milk and almond milk already existed, but Oatstay believed that he could use oats to make a drink that tastes more similar to cow milk. Oat milk is made by grinding up oats into a fine powder and mixing it with water. A vegetable oil, typically rapeseed oil, is added to increase the fat content and give it a creamy taste. Amylase is typically added to break down the oat starch into sugar. This makes the oat milk far sweeter than plain oats without added sugar. There were two motivations to make a compelling alternative to cow milk. Firstly, it is estimated that 68% of the world's population suffers from lactose intolerance. Lactose is a type of sugar found in cow's milk. Almost all infants can digest lactose, but once people become adults, they often lose the enzymes that digest lactose. People with lactose intolerance can suffer digestive issues, including bloating, diarrhea, and general discomfort after consuming large amounts of lactose. Lactose intolerance is a sliding scale. Most people who are technically lactose intolerant can drink moderate amounts of milk without suffering symptoms. Symptoms often only appear after drinking large amounts of milk. Lactose intolerance is genetic. It is most prevalent in Eastern and Central Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Europe, and Latin America. Lactose intolerance in Sweden is very low, in fact one of the lowest in the world at less than 20%. So it might seem weird that oat milk was invented in Sweden. Counterintuitively, the low prevalence of lactose intolerance actually catalyzed the development of oat milk. Because lactose intolerance is so rare, Swedish people drink large amounts of milk. The few people who are lactose intolerant feel left out. This creates strong demand for milk alternatives from the small percentage of the population that is intolerant. The second motivation for oat milk is environmental. Cows' digestive systems produce large amounts of methane, which they release when they belch. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas. With increasing awareness around climate change, many consumers want alternative food options with a smaller carbon footprint. Oat milk is believed by many to be a more climate-friendly alternative to cow milk. However, the environmental impact is complicated. We'll delve into this later in the video. After Professor Oatly invented oat milk, he founded a company called Oatly to sell it. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Oatly operated at a small scale, producing and selling oat milk only within the domestic Swedish market for the most part. In 2012, Oatly hired a new CEO called Tony Peterson. Peterson had grand ambitions to transform Oatly from a niche company in Sweden to a multinational powerhouse. He started off by completely changing the packaging. The old Oatly cartons were generic and blended in with the dozens of other beverages at the grocery stores. The new cartons were made to look hip and trendy, instantly grabbing the attention of passing shoppers. One of the biggest problems from a marketing perspective is that most consumers had never heard of oat milk and had no idea what it was. It can be difficult to make someone try something they've never heard of. Instead of shying away from oat milk's uniqueness, Peterson embraced it. He created unorthodox marketing material, such as a poster saying "This drink tastes like crap." Most marketing professionals would cringe at something as crazy as this, but it grabs the shopper's attention and gets them to read the rest of the message. The poster goes on to say you might like oat milk, but you might not. If you don't like it, that's okay, because in that case, you can give it to someone you don't like. These humorous and self-deprecating ads were marketing genius. They got first-time consumers interested in the brand and willing to give it a try. Throughout the early 2010s, Oatly gradually expanded across Europe. In 2016, they wanted to expand across the Atlantic to the United States. At this point, Oatly was still a small company. They didn't have the budget for expensive national advertising campaigns, so they needed to get creative. They sent salespeople to hip coffee shops in New York City. This was the perfect demographic for hip young people who'd be willing to try a new, environmentally sustainable milk alternative. The coffee shops loved it and couldn't get enough. By first selling to coffee shops, they were able to build a name for themselves in the US, allowing them to soon thereafter get shelf space at major grocery stores. With the early success, they were able to raise venture capital funding and start running large-scale television commercials. Most of their commercials focus on demonizing milk. In the US, they satirized the milk industry's commercials from the 1950s and 60s. The idea is that milk is a thing of the past. Now we have a better, more sustainable alternative in the form of oat milk. Their marketing heavily emphasized oat milk's low carbon footprint. They proudly advertised the low carbon emissions associated with each carton of Oatly, and claimed that this is 40 to 80% less than an equivalent serving of cow milk. After the US, Oatly turned its attention to China. With a huge population and high prevalence of lactose intolerance, China seemed like an obvious market for them. They followed a similar strategy as they used in the US, gained proof of concept by targeting high-end coffee shops, then expanded to grocery stores. By 2021, demand was surging and their production capacity couldn't keep up. This was a perfect time to raise capital with an IPO. This was at the peak of the COVID bubble, and investors were ecstatic about hot new sustainability-focused startups. Oatly was able to raise over $1 billion of proceeds at a $10 billion valuation. They would use these funds to build new production facilities in the US, Europe, and China to meet surging demand. Everything seemed to be looking up for the company, but 3 years later, its market value has declined by 95% and appears to be headed towards bankruptcy. So what happened? In 2020, Oatly's revenue more than doubled versus 2019 to $421 million. In 2021, revenue grew at a still very impressive 48%. Investors always love a fast-growing company, and that's how Oatly was able to achieve a $10 billion valuation. Of course, having high demand for your product is only useful to the extent that you can ramp up production to meet that demand. When Oatly went public in 2021, they had 4 operational production facilities. Their main markets were Europe, North America, and China. For the European market, they had 2 facilities, one in Sweden and another in the Netherlands. For the US market, they had one in New Jersey, and a new facility they had just opened in Utah. They didn't have any facilities in Asia. Up until this point, they shipped the oat milk from Europe to China, which added significant transportation costs. They plan to use their $1 billion of IPO proceeds to build new factories in Texas, the UK, Singapore, and China over the coming years. This was an extremely ambitious plan to increase their production 5-fold in 3 years, from 300 million liters in 2020 to almost 1.5 billion liters in 2023. In hindsight, these expansion plans were way too ambitious. Building large manufacturing facilities is a complex and expensive process, especially in the food industry where you need to meet government health and safety regulations. In 2021, their new facility in Utah produced lower than expected output due to mechanical and technical issues. They also had unspecified quality issues at one of their European facilities, resulting in lower than expected production. With resources diverted to fix issues at their existing facilities, Oatly was forced to delay the opening of new facilities. In the fourth quarter of 2022, they issued a revised timeline for their new facilities. The Texas facility was delayed from 2023 to 2024 or 2025. The UK facility was delayed from 2023 to 2025 or 2026. The second China facility was delayed from 2023 to 2024 or 2025. As Oatly failed to ramp up production, they were forced to rely on contract manufacturers to make the oat milk for them. Contract manufacturing is almost always more expensive because the contractor needs to make their own profit margin. These higher costs caused Oatly's gross margins to plummet from 33% in 2019 down to just 11% in 2022. In fact, the reality is much worse. Oatly made the unusual accounting decision to classify outbound shipping costs within selling and general administrative expenses instead of cost of goods sold. This is controversial because shipping is part of the performance obligation that Oatly owes to its customers. Thus, many people believe that shipping costs should be included in cost of goods sold. If we include shipping costs, their gross profit margin fell to a razor-thin 3% in 2022. This is not nearly enough to cover their corporate overhead and marketing. While Oatly was having supply issues, its competitors were ramping up production. While Oatly did file some patents, they were only able to patent the specific process they used to make the oat milk. The idea of oat milk is too broad to patent. So competitors, including Khalifa Farms, Chobani, and even Walmart's Great Value brand, were able to make their own oat milk with almost identical taste and nutritional value. These are established companies with much more experience in mass production than Oatly. Oatly's CEO, Tony Peterson, was out of his league. He deserves credit as a brilliant marketer and creative genius responsible for building the Oatly brand. But he lacked the manufacturing expertise to run a complex multinational supply chain to produce hundreds of millions of liters of product. In late 2022, they announced a restructuring of their manufacturing operations. Instead of trying to do everything themselves, they would only produce the oat base. They would hire a contract manufacturer to turn this into the finished product and package it. Working with a contractor would permanently decrease their margins, but with the delays and operational problems they were facing, they couldn't do everything on their own. In June of 2023, Oatly replaced longtime CEO Tony Peterson with John Christoph Flatten. Flatten previously served as an executive at Mars, the food giant behind M&M's and Snickers. Flatten scaled back the company's growth plans and continued to shift production towards contract manufacturing. Flatten was able to slow the bleeding and reduced Oatly's operating losses, but their revenue growth also flatlined. When the company went public, its revenue was growing at close to 50% year over year. Now, the growth has slowed to almost nothing. Even with the rapid growth in recent years, alternative milk is estimated to only represent about 3% of the total dairy market. The vast majority of consumers are still sticking with real milk. The main reason for this is the high cost. I've compiled the price per fluid ounce of various oat milk brands on Walmart.com. Prices will vary by location, but with Walmart being the largest retailer in the US, this should give us a reasonable ballpark. Oatly is in the middle of the pack at 18 cents per fluid ounce. The cheapest by far is the Walmart brand Great Value oat milk, which is only 6 cents per fluid ounce. Even this is significantly more expensive than real milk. 2% fat name brand milk is 4 cents per fluid ounce. Great Value 2% milk is only 2 cents per fluid ounce. On the surface, it might be surprising that oat milk is so much more expensive than cow milk. You need to feed cows for them to produce milk. Shouldn't oat milk be much more efficient because you're turning grain directly into milk? As it turns out, raising dairy cattle is extremely cheap. According to a study by the University of California, Davis, the vast majority of a dairy cow's diet is made up of hay and byproducts. Hay is extremely cheap to produce. It can be grown on poor quality land that is not suitable for growing other crops. About 40% of the cow's diet is byproducts. For example, lemonade and pomegranate juice producers create huge amounts of lemon and pomegranate rinds. Because cows have very strong stomachs, they can eat these byproducts, which are inedible for humans. These byproducts have no other use and would otherwise end up in a landfill, so dairy farmers can buy it for an extremely cheap cost. Cows indeed need to eat a lot more food compared to the amount of oats needed to make oat milk, but because the cows mostly eat grass and trash, the cost is very low. In 2022, a consulting firm called Mintex published a report comparing the total cost of plant-based milk and real milk. The cost of raw materials, the milk itself, is similar. However, plant-based milk producers spend way more on packaging, bottling, R&D, corporate overhead, and logistics. Furthermore, the retailers charge a far higher markup to end consumers for plant-based milk. For regular milk, the retailer makes almost no profit margin. Because milk is an essential item for many shoppers, grocery stores are extremely competitive on the pricing. For a lot of consumers, milk is the one thing they almost always buy. Thus, they are much more likely to go to a grocery store that has the cheapest milk price. The grocery stores know this, so they price their milk at extremely low profit margins to attract shoppers. Once the shopper is in the store, they'll hopefully buy a lot of higher margin products as well. Because milk is a commodity, most consumers are happy to buy the store brand milk at the cheapest price. Walmart and Kroger, the two largest grocery stores in the US, both own their own milk bottling facilities to bottle their store brand milk. The volumes of milk they sell is so high that vertical integration is worthwhile to keep the cost as low as possible. Walmart and Kroger buy the milk from large farming cooperatives. Everything is done at an industrial scale. The supply chains have been built over decades and operate at peak efficiency. For store-branded milk, there is substantially zero advertising. Everybody knows what milk is. If you go to the grocery store, chances are you'll just buy the cheapest option. Compare this to Oatly. They have to spend hugely on advertising to get consumers interested in oat milk. If the advertising is successful, they'll convince first-time consumers to give oat milk a try. And they'll probably buy Oatly as that's what they remember from the ad. But eventually they'll see that the store brand oat milk is 1/3 the price and it's almost the exact same thing. Oatly will never have the scale or operational expertise to compete with the likes of Walmart or Kroger. The only advantage they have is their brand. This was very useful in the early years when they were the only oat milk on the market, but in the long run, branding isn't worth a whole lot for a commodity product. One of the main reasons that people buy oat milk is because they perceive it to be better for the environment compared to cow's milk. Oatly heavily emphasizes climate sustainability in their advertising. According to McKinsey, 23% of people who drink plant-based milk do so for environmental reasons. Oatly claims to be a science-based company and publishes statistics to show how much better for the environment their product is compared to cow's milk. As the great Mark Twain once said, there are 3 types of lies: lies, damned lies, and statistics. Even if statistics are technically true, without the proper context they can be selectively presented to provide a misleading portrayal of reality. In 2022, the UK's Advertising Standards Authority forced Oatly to take down one of its ads. The ad claimed that Oatly creates 73% less CO2 than dairy products. Oatly sells many products, and there are also many different dairy products. Oatly selectively compared one of their lowest carbon products to one of the highest carbon dairy products to come up with a 73% number. Since then, Oatly has adjusted its marketing to instead say that its products generate between 44 and 80% lower carbon impacts than cow milk. While this is probably technically true, just looking at the direct carbon statistics paints an incomplete picture. Oatly calculates this by looking at the lifetime emissions of a cow, which is mostly methane, and divides this by the amount of milk the cow produces. This fails to consider the fact that dairy cows are slaughtered for their meat at the end of their useful lives. Some of the methane emissions should also be allocated to the meat, thereby reducing the allocation to the milk. Also, remember that up to 40% of a dairy cow's diet consists of byproducts. This organic waste would emit methane if it were allowed to decompose in a landfill. When the cow digests these byproducts, it produces methane. Thus, the cow gets blamed for methane that would have been emitted anyway. But there's an even more fundamental problem with these comparisons. Obviously, milk produces some greenhouse gas emissions, so if you want to reduce your carbon footprint, you should stop drinking milk, right? What would be the best thing to replace it with? Water seems like an obvious choice. Water production generates almost zero greenhouse gas emissions, but there's a problem with this. Water has 0 calories and 0 nutritional value. Thus, if you replace all of your milk with water, you need to eat more food to replace the nutritional content you used to get from milk. The extra food you eat may generate more carbon emissions than the milk you gave up. A paper published in the Food and Nutrition Research publication tried to quantify this. It compares various beverages based on their greenhouse gas emissions as well as their nutritional value. The nutritional value is based on the Nordic Nutrition Recommendations, which is a widely accepted set of guidelines for what nutrients are essential to maintain human health. Milk indeed has one of the highest greenhouse gas emissions, almost 5 times as much as oat milk. But cow milk also has a ton of essential nutrients, including protein, calcium, phosphorus, vitamin A, vitamin D, riboflavin, and many others. Milk has the most essential nutrients of any of the drinks they compared. They divide the essential nutrients by the greenhouse gas emissions to calculate the Nutrient Density to Climate Impact Index, or NDCI. This represents the bang for your buck. How much nutritional value do you get in return for your greenhouse gases? The higher the NDCI, the better. Milk has the highest NDCI by far. Soft drinks and alcohol are the worst. They emit significant greenhouse gases, but have almost 0 essential nutrients. Oat milk is also one of the worst. While it has very little greenhouse gas emissions, it also has very little essential nutrients. Milk is not the problem. If you're concerned about climate impact, you're much better off reducing consumption of soft drinks and alcohol. Oatly has been the subject of a lot of bad press recently about its environmental marketing. Just this year, they had to pay $9 million to settle a shareholder lawsuit, alleging they misled investors about their ESG credentials. For a brand that builds much of its identity around sustainability, these controversies are disastrous. The last piece of the puzzle is China. With its massive population and high prevalence of lactose intolerance, China was supposed to be a major growth driver for Oatly. Yet if we look at their revenue by region, China has been declining over the past 2 years. So what happened? China has always been lactose intolerant. For the past 2,000 years, they've been drinking soy milk. Soy milk is made on an industrial scale and at a much cheaper cost than Oatly can ever hope to match. Thanks to a massive marketing effort, they were able to get a little bit of success in the beginning, as people wanted to give this new drink a try. But the idea that China would ever be a successful market for them was fanciful. And they still suffer the same problem that oat milk is a commodity. Seeing Oatly's initial success, local companies started producing their own oat milk, pushing margins down to razor-thin levels. The story of Oatly shows that marketing campaigns, no matter how creative, cannot create sustainable value for a commodity product. For industries like oat milk, the only thing that matters is being able to produce massive quantities of product at cheap prices. Distracted by marketing and greenwashing, Oatly failed to keep up with the competition. And frankly, it's probably too late to turn things around. Alright guys, that wraps it up for this video. What do you think about Oatly? Let us know in the comments section below. As always, thank you so much for watching and we'll see you in the next one. Wall Street Millennial, signing out.